So my name's Lance Criley, and I'm the range management specialist for the forest, which means my main job is administering all the grazing permits we have in the Cleveland National Forest. So you guys have probably seen cattle grazing. Those are all permitted. Not every single one of them is permitted, that's a problem, but we do have grazing permits. So that's my main job, but my other main job, my other hat is the invasive weed program on the forest. So Lisa talked about the plants we want on the forest. This is more about the plants we don't want on the forest, or would prefer not to have. So first off, what's an invasive plant? This definition is non-native introduced plant that adversely affects the habitats they invade economically, environmentally, and or ecologically. I'm not sure what the difference between environmentally and ecologically is. But
Ecologically would be the functioning.
So the invasive plants we have, so that, there's an orange tree out there, that's a non-native plant. But we don't worry about that as an invasive plant because it's not spreading on its own. So the plants we're talking about are plants that people brought here fairly recently that are now out there reproducing all by themselves without any human help. And we treat native species very differently on the forest depending on what we think their effects are. We don't always really know what their effects are, but what we think their effects are, and whether we think we can do anything about that plant. So I'm going to talk about this in sort of two parts. So the first part is going to be talking about some of the species on the Cleveland National Forest that we actively manage and try to treat and try to eradicate from certain areas. And then the second part is about the more widespread, what we call naturalized non-native species, which really impact you guys a lot more than the stuff we target specifically. So when we're talking about plants, we have to think about, we're talking about a plant species that's non-native. We have to think about what its lifestyle is. Is it an annual or a perennial? Do people know the difference between an annual and a perennial? It's pretty clear on that. And so a lot of our weeds are annual species, which means they sprout in the fall, grow, flower, make seed, die. So they have this limited time frame, and then they exist as seed on the ground. And those plants are a lot harder to deal with than the perennials. So a lot of the things we tend to target are perennials, just because with our resources, we know we can do something about them. So I'm just going to run through a list of some of the species we really work on the forest. Yellow star thistle. I don't know if you guys have seen this plant. So this plant is an issue for us, especially on the Tribuco Ranger District. And that's going to become a theme, the Tribuco Ranger District. I'm sure who here is from the Tribuco?
Sounds like it.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So,
Weeds.
yeah, so for weed. So this
is weed right here. Thanks, Chief.
This species, we have a lot of it on the Tribuco Ranger District. We don't have a lot on the Palomar, the Descanso. We really want to keep it that way. If you go north of LA, this plant just dominates places. It's a major issue north. But it seems to be working its way south, and we want to sort of hold the line. But we have another thing. So this is yellow star thistle, these two. This is a plant called tocolote, which we literally have everywhere on the forest. In fact, someone asked me for a map of our tocolote distribution, so I just sent them the Cleveland National Forest boundary. And they're very similar plants, but they act very differently in the environment. Where this stuff is. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so this stuff is just literally everywhere. And you can tell the difference between the two. The spine on the star thistle is usually about an inch long and very stiff. This stuff, you can kind of run your fingers on it and it bends, much shorter spine. And this stuff just sort of grows here and there all around. The star thistle just forms just dense patches, impenetrable patches. So we have that on the Tribuco. We do have some on the Descanso. Some other thistles that we have that we sometimes target, depending on where they're at. Especially this archer thistle, that's one that we definitely want to take out when we have it. These two are pretty much forest-wide. This one, guess where we have it? Tribuco. Actually, all three of those are mainly, like, our biggest infestations are in the Tribuco.
Why does it end up on the Tribuco?
So the Tribuco is, you know, it's just that crappy district up there.
Oh, yeah.
No, the Tribuco,
We're in the,
the Tribuco really has the most, the climate on the Tribuco is most like Northern California as far as the districts go. Right? It's closest to the ocean, so it's got a more maritime influence. It's a little wetter. So it just has the conditions that a lot of these plants that are coming from the north, like that's where they can get the foothold. And it's also just surrounded on four sides by major development, so there's lots of sources of things coming in there. Arundo, so Emily talked about this one. This is a nice perennial plant, so it's out there, it lives, you go out and you kill that plant, you've done some good. Guess where it's the worst? Tribuco. Yeah, so, but we've done a lot of work on this on the Tribuco, so we've eliminated a lot of it.
The first it came from, they have that in one of the canyons, and they're trying to get rid of it. The county was,
Yeah.
the problem is you can only get rid of it like in July or June.
They might have had,
And they had to inject, like cut it, first cut, and then inject everything.
yeah, they might have had a specific, like a different regulation on their timing because of a species or something. So they may be avoiding a breeding season or something.
It only lasted like 5 minutes, and the guy, or 15 minutes, the guy passed out because he was in a Class A hazmat suit. And stuff.
Yeah. So one thing I should back up, so on the
But
so in the Cleveland National Forest, we've accomplished something which was pretty rare in the Forest Service, in that we finished all our environmental work, our NEPA document, to treat, just to treat weeds. So we can use 5 herbicides, we have sideboards and when we can use them, where we can use them. So it's really nice for that. It took a lot of work, but we got there. So I know the San Bernardino doesn't have that. So like if they have this, they have to do this very site specific. So the way we get rid of this is we cut it. So we go in and cut it. Usually in the springtime, it kind of doesn't even matter when you cut it. We cut it and we take all the reed and we try to get it away from the stream channel, because if it's in a place that can grow, the stuff you cut will just start rooting into the ground. Or if it gets washed downstream, that will all start rooting. So we take the reed, move it off, and then it all just resprouts. Like, stuff grows a foot a day during that's amazing how fast it grows. So when it's about that tall, I go in and spray it with an herbicide. And then the next year you spray it with an herbicide. And then the next year you spray it with an herbicide. And eventually you get down to where like there's just one last little bit of green. But it's a tenacious plant. In places where it's a lot worse, they take like bulldozers and they'll just actually just chain it out of the ground. It's a major issue. Here's some other plants that are a big deal. Edible fig, guess where that's a problem? Tribuco, yeah, so Tribuco Canyon specifically, that stuff is kicking our ass, and we have a project in the works to start to work on that. I'm trying to figure out how to retire before this. It's gonna be such a nightmare. Fountain grass, pampas grass, guess where those are the worst? Spanish broom, tree tobacco, tree of heaven, some more. This one is one that is pretty much everywhere, and we'll treat it if it's there. It's not an enormous issue for us. Spanish broom, guess where that's the worst?
with your highway.
Tribuco, Ortega Highway, yeah, it's terrible. Tree of heaven, it's actually not the worst in Tribuco, it's the worst in Palomar. That's one that people planted, and then it just starts to just sort of move around. So it's kind of, we had that one in places where, like we took over an old home site, or an old homestead, something will have like a patch of that.
We have a lot of that in Central.
Then tamarisk, which is that's probably the one we spend the most time on, just because we have the most of it, but it's kind of rival. And guess what district that's the worst on? Wrong, I tricked you. It's the one that's not bad as Tribuco. That's bad on Descanso, parts of Palomar. So it's because it's more of a desert plant. So that takes over the stream channels also.
You know, we have it as endangered by Palm Canyon, and they protect it there. Isn't that weird?
Well, Well, they're actually killing it in Palm Canyon.
Yeah,
Are they?
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
it?
Yeah,
yeah, she's killing it.
yeah.
Oh, because, another person that would go out there and,
There's a plant adjacent to it that she's trying to protect.
oh, okay.
What happens with this in a lot of places, not in the forest here so much, but in the west, is that it just takes over riverbeds. So then the only thing that certain birds can use is that. So then there's endangered birds nesting in it. They don't really prefer it, but it's all they got. And then they get prevented from treating it because that's all that's there. It's kind of crazy. I hate when that happens.
It's kind of weird. It's a desert species that only grows in riparian areas.
Yeah, it grows along like desert washes and
Desert.
yeah.
So, does it need dry spells or something like that?
I think it might, that's a good
I know
question. I
it's
think it
deeply
might
rooted.
I think it just might compete better when there's dryness at certain times of year. Yeah, but it grows along like floodplains of rivers.
Yeah.
So I think it also likes, it's like willow, it likes that, like it's scrubbed off and then there's. So I guess, maybe I should backpedal, like why do we care about this stuff? Why do we treat this stuff? And it goes back to a lot of stuff that Lisa was saying. It used to be that, actually just, it kind of still is, that it's like, if it's not native, it's bad, we're gonna try to kill it. But we're really because of limited resources and just science, are really trying to get to a point where we're trying to pick our battles better about what we're treating and what we're not treating, what's really a problem. But the truth is, you just don't know. So a lot of this is stuff that's coming in that could be a problem, let's get it before we find out it's a problem. Tamarisk is a big water supply issue. There's a lot of belief that it sucks more water than the native vegetation, which might be a spurious claim just to justify getting rid of it, but arundo definitely does. And a lot of, just on a bigger picture with invasive plants, there's a term that gets batted about, and you saw it with the Galapagos thing. People call it the coming global ecosystem. And it's the whole idea that these species are getting moved around the globe, and eventually it's just no matter where you go on the globe, it's going to be the same set of species there. So that's kind of what we're trying to prevent. So as far as these species and your work, fuels work and fire work, a lot of it is about preventing the spread of these. So so a lot of the way these things move is seed gets lodged in like tires and on equipment, in your socks. Everybody's had that experience. And then things, animals can move them too, which is sort of a growing issue with us in the fuels program, because we've been using goats, right? So there's a lot of design criteria that go into the fuels projects around these things. So who's been on a fire and had to take their fire engine through a weed wash station, and who rolled their eyes? I roll my eyes too. So it's fine to roll your eyes when you do that, because usually they're not very well implemented. But the idea of that is to, clean the equipment off. So probably everyone did a turn on the rim fire, right? You don't hear one? It's a rim fire. Okay. So the lowest camp, the one nearest to Nora, I don't know if you guys were in that camp. That camp was basically in just the biggest patch of yellow star thistle I've ever seen. Just the whole, everybody's camped in yellow star thistle. Their trucks are parked in yellow star thistle. So they had one little weed wash station that everybody was supposed to go through. Right next to a bunch of yellow star thistle, there's all this mud right as you left the weed wash station. So you get mud on your things, star thistle seed all over it, and people drive off.
There was a fire a couple years back where they were actually doing the boots too. You'd stop as soon as you came off the line next to the road. You'd
Yeah.
get out. They'd have tubs of bleach water. You dip your boots in and
Yeah,
get back in the truck and drive off. And it was like, so you have it on the floor. You get out, clean your boots, and you get back on the floor
yeah.
and it's right back on your boots.
Yeah, and certainly New Zealand, if you get off a plane in New Zealand, you gotta do that. You gotta dump your boots in certain islands, yeah.
So I have a question, as far as, I'm from Michigan, and apparently we have mostly invasive. But we go to the Palomar all the time to help them burn. We use driver vehicles. Has anyone ever thought about building stations, like weed washing stations on our own stations? Protect our, if we're looking to move stuff south.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that too
we could
much,
be
and
the
it's something
worst
that,
carriers.
We had one. We had one at Oak Grove. We got this now.
Oh, really?
That's like like a perfect
Yeah.
spot when we go down to
Yeah.
Brink, because you gotta go by there.
No, that's something we could be better at. One thing, we don't have, like, none of the stations I can think of are like surrounded by Star Thistle. So that's good, like, there's none, nor it's like leaning onto El Carrizo Fire Station or anything, but I'm sure we do. I mean, we move stuff around. Surely we move stuff around. So you'll see sometimes we'll put things in there about, one of the biggest things we'll put in a NEPA document for fuels is equipment, like contract equipment coming to the site needs to be cleaned before it arrives on the site. And so a big thing with that is, where was that equipment? That's where, we could write that in there and people roll their eyes, but if you have a contractor coming to work for you and they're coming from Northern California, just say, hey, before you come over the Grapevine, clean your bridge, like get the mud off the flaps before you show up. Goats. Who's worked on a project that's had goats? So goats, the way those goat people are contractors too. They're moving their herds all over the state, and goats are really good. They're in the stuff all the time. They eat it. It stays in their body. They poop it out. The seed's still viable. So that's why we've had restrictions on the goat contracts where they have to come in and they have to basically be in a little quarantine area until they get everything through their system at that time, and then they're allowed to go out in the forest. So that might work. We'll see.
I know a lot of forests too are requiring, like, say, they have horse trails for horses. I can't remember the name of them right now, equestrian. And they're required, people that bring your horse, they're required to use certain feeds.
Yeah, so
before they
there's,
come on the
yeah,
forest, but it's like, how can you?
yeah, that's true. So there's, it's called weed-free feed,
Yeah.
weed-free forage. The truth is that it's super rare to actually find it on the market.
Yeah.
So, yeah, people throw that out there. I mean, I should be a big prophet about that stuff, and I don't know. Like, so I manage the grazing program, and sometimes people, they need to bring feed in for their cattle, and I know for a fact that here, when they're buying alfalfa from cattle, they're getting it from the Imperial Valley, which doesn't have a lot of the weeds we're worried about, so I kind of just come. But I ask them, I'm like, you guys aren't buying it from the Central Valley, right? If they're bringing it from down there, they can bring all sorts of things. So the other way that we treat for these kind of species, if you guys are working around them and we know they're there, we often will put a thing on there, we'll treat them before you start work. So that there isn't a plant there with its seed ready to spread all over the place. And so that's sort of one of the goals, Well, like with yellow star thistle, if you're gonna do a project site around yellow star thistle, we probably wanna make sure there's no actual flowering star thistle present when you guys are working. And then your job, that's one of the things about these weeds, is they tend to like things that are disturbed. So sometimes these patches, we might just say stay clear, can you not work here? Because any equipment we're gonna do there, all that seed in the ground is just gonna lump. And you can't do anything about the seed in the ground, really. So that's sort of that's our targeted weeds. Those are weeds that we actively treat. I'll come back to a Tamarisk project that we did, that some of you might have worked on. I hope not, you'll hate me if you did. So we'll move on to the more ubiquitous weeds, naturalized species. So there's these non-native that we can tackle, that we know where they're at, and there's just a little bit, and we can kill them. And then there's these things that basically are just everywhere. They're kind of the new normal. And mainly that's grasses, non-native annual grasses on the landscape. So a lot of people come to California and they're like, oh, look at the beautiful oak woodland, and they don't understand that all the grass they're seeing is non-native. Pretty much 100% is a non-native grass. And it's just the new situation there. No one's really stressing out about it anymore because it's just sort of a done deal, right? But down here in the chaparral, it's sort of a different issue. And I think you guys have all, did you guys all have to watch the Hugh Safford thing? Let's just say they. So I'm going to beat that thing on the head a little more. So we have a lot of non-native annual grasses. They're all from the Mediterranean region, which has the same climate as we do. Yeah. So they're annual, so they live in the winter, flower, they're all flowering right now, make a seed, drop the seed, build up the seed bank in the soil. It's incredibly difficult to try to like clear an area of these plants. It's really, really, really difficult. People have been spending a lot of time trying to figure out if there's something we can do about them. There's also a whole host of non-grass things that are kind of come along with them, like mustards. This guy is called fillery. They're all plants that have been here since the Spanish arrived, really, and they're just around. The Spanish brought them. So I don't know if so the Spanish, when this black mustard there, the Brassica nigra. If you ever go to Europe, you'll see it. They're growing it in fields to make mustard, and it's beautiful. And people go to these regions because it's this gorgeous thing. And here, when the Spanish came, there's a myth, and I don't know how true it is, that as the Spanish would move around Southern California, go exploring, figuring out where they could set up shop next, they would throw mustard seed behind them because the yellow flowers would then lead them back to where they were.
Yellow brick road.
Sure.
Yeah.
European. Johnny Mustard Seed are European.
So a lot of these plants are having a profound effect on wildfire around the country, especially in the West. So it depends on where you're at, but a lot of these non-native grasses are altering fire regimes around the country. So you guys know all that stuff. So this is a series of slides about red brome, which is one specific non-native annual grass we have. These are collections of red brome known to have been taken in 1900. So it's pretty well found around California. 1920, 1940,
Oh God.
Smallpox.
1960, 1980, 1998. So, and red brome specifically, here in California, it's just one of the many non-native annual grasses we have. In Arizona, it's a huge problem for fire.
But what are they basing it on? It's just because it's grass it can burn, or?
So, yeah, so I'll get to that here. So in Arizona, what it does, there's the Sonoran Desert vegetation. There normally wouldn't have been this grass component there. Now, all this space is getting filled in by red brome. At certain elevations, at other elevations, it's a grass called buffalo grass is doing it. This thing's terrible. So there's the grass filling in. I think that's buffalo grass. It's hard to tell in the soil. I'm pretty sure it's buffalo grass. Then you get a fire, and that vegetation in the Sonoran Desert is not adapted to fire. It's not used to having fire roll through the landscape like that. So you lose that vegetation type, or just severely damage it. Which often, guess what loves fire? Non-native annual grasses. So they move right back in. Unless a fire is really hot. If a fire is really hot, you can kill that seed bank, but otherwise it just opens it up for them. They love it. So cheatgrass is a big issue in the Great Basin, so like Nevada. It does the same thing, same cycle. Fills in all this space that was probably just bare ground before, or just little flowers. Catches on fire, takes the sagebrush out. You get a landscape that used to look like that, starts to look like that. Am I stealing your thunder, Neil? Were you going to talk about any of this stuff? Okay.
Go for it.
I don't know what that picture's about. I think that's just fire moving across the stage. So Southern California, we have some of the same processes at work here. It's not a slam dunk case as the Great Basin or the Sonoran Desert, but there's a 2003 firestorm. Don't know where that. I don't have the mad PowerPoint skills that Lisa has, so this is all like from an old talk. So skip that one. You guys know about San Diego backcountry development. This is a map of showing chaparral age. So the big concern, and you guys are seeing this, is that if chaparral burns too frequently, you get a conversion of chaparral to non-native annual grasses as the dominant veg type. So this map just basically is showing how old chaparral is, which is years since the last burn, and red is more frequently burned. So it's showing, you know, kind of how much fire we have on the landscape in San Diego County. This is that work that Hugh did about just mean fire frequency departure. You guys have probably talked about this plenty. So again, all the stuff that's yellow, orange, red is stuff that's burning too frequently. Believed to be burning too frequently from natural. And so you guys have probably all seen this picture a million times, no? This picture, so you guys heard of the Chaparral Institute? This is sort of like the picture that they use in every talk. And what it is, this is near Descanso, kind of off I-8. And this whole landscape burned in 1970 in the Laguna fire. This piece, so this piece burned in 1970 and 2001, I believe, the Viejas fire. And then this burned 1970, 2001, and 2003. So he takes this picture and it shows that this is all non-native annual plants. This is recovering, but it's, you know, a little sparser. Everything else, of course, is awesome. If you go to that spot now, it doesn't look like that. It's actually recovered pretty nice, even the one that's been burned 3 times. So it's a challenge that Southern California faces where, and this is where I put the caveat, coastal chaparral type or coastal sage scrub, we know for a fact converts to annual grassland with too much fire. Upland chaparral, the stuff that you guys are mostly working in, the case is a little more tenuous scientifically. You'll hear as you're field planning, you'll get letters saying you're going to type convert this stuff. And that's where we're sort of out on a ledge right now, scientifically and in our knowledge of the system. But the concern is when you guys go in and do a fuels treatment on a site, basically you're adding the equivalent, if you're not burning it, you're at least adding the equivalent of a fire on the landscape. So that kind of just sets that clock on that piece of ground to where it's then burning more, you know, its frequency of disturbance is going up enough that you're going to get this conversion to the non-native grasses. That's the idea. In the upland chaparral, I'm skeptical because, you know, I work with ranchers and they'll tell you that they've been trying to type convert chaparral since they got here. You know, so people have been trying to get rid of chaparral on purpose for a very long time and haven't been that successful at it. But still, it's what you're going to hear. And then on field breaks, where you're continually disturbing a field break, you'll get this conversion to non-native annual grasses. So that's probably recalls Zira's kid or something, probably crying as they look out over the field break there.
Yeah, his tears were watering.
Tears are watering the ground. And so, but it's a true concern, and it's something that I think we as an agency and you guys, us in resources and you guys as fire people, what did Lisa say about being honest about what's really happening? Like, we've been kind of dicking around this issue, saying that we're going to do these field breaks and everything's going to be wonderful. And I think we really need to own up to the fact, like, no, we're purposely converting areas to a non-native species. And then they'll come back and say, well, that non-native species is much more flammable, right? Because it dries earlier. And so if you throw a cigarette on there, it might light, but then that's where we need to come back and say, well, yeah, but we'd much rather put out grass fire. Chaparral fire is much easier to fight. So I think it's just something that we as a forest, as an agency in Southern California need to get better equipped with our arguments around. On the Descanso, we just got a comment letter on the Alpine field break where they're basically asking us to treat all non-native annual grasses along the field break forever. And we're going to tell them we're not going to do that, but that's just kind of where...
Tell them we'll do it if they fund it.
Yeah, so it's kind of where that is heading. So it's a concern. So if you have this beautiful area of chaparral that's 30 years old, you're not going to find a lot of these non-native species in there, and so it is a concern if you're proposing building a field break through it. Do you really want to like bring the seed source into the system there? But those are the kind of things that we're dealing with on the invasive plant side and fire. So now we're going to. So who worked on the Cottonwood Creek Tamarisk removal project? Anybody? Were you out there?
It's the first project I saw when I came over.
Oh.
Did no one here worked on it? That's awesome. People that worked on it don't like me
They've moved
anymore.
on since.
Yeah, they all
That's
quit.
just past Cottonwood.
Yeah. So this is a project, so there are some instances where taking out an invasive species meets fuel targets. And this was one of them, where this area was just solid tamarisk, stuff super flammable. We were able, through a combination of money, some of it was from hazardous fuels in the forest, we're able to treat this 80-acre area. So that's what it looked like before. This is all big tamarisk trees. And now, looks like that, which kind of looks crappier, but it's actually much better. Now it's just turning into this beautiful meadow. It's all green. It looks better than that now. That's actually like a 5-year-old photo.
So would that be kind of like a watershed issue too, because you're eliminating, you're sucking trees that are kind of taking much moisture?
Yeah, so the project was funded originally. There was funding that came from the county and the city of San Diego, and it was to improve water yield into Lake Marina here. So that was the first push of funding, and then we just wanted to get rid of it just because it's non-native. We have a lot of sensitive species in the area that it was out crowding out. And then also it was a huge fuels issue in that if a fire came through there, it would just burn across. So there's, we sprayed the stumps. There's the stumps. And then this is all native vegetation coming in post-treatment. There's the contractors who were doing the work, which was just nasty, nasty work. They cut it, they sprayed it, built the piles, and then, then our guys burnt the piles. And that process went on for a really long time. And people were not happy about it because we ended up with one pile that was so huge that we thought we were going to broadcast burn basically this pile. It probably would have ice capped. The thing was so huge. And then the DFMO changed hands and the new person wanted it piled. So everybody had to break up this monster pile into smaller piles. People were not happy about it. And I kept going out there like, this is great, guys, and they were not. So this is the reason the tamarisk was so bad there was that the previous owner of that property was an old ranch. He used to actively pull the native willows out. So he was a rancher and he thought that the willows were sucking water, which they probably do. And then he walked away and tamarisk invaded. So this is the old property line. So this is all native vegetation and then it was just tamarisk. So we're kind of hoping it starts, this side starts to look more like this side in the years that follow. And I think that's it for me. Any other questions?
Questions for?
So I guess one of the things is, so people are starting to, I guess, just realize that we are kind of, like with cheatgrass.
Mhm.
I know that they spent millions of dollars trying to get rid of it in certain areas. But are they trying to just kind of saying, hey, it's now native, like you're saying?
Well, so
You know what I mean? I'm sorry.
yeah.
You're spending lots of money, but you're not really getting
so-
a foothold on some of it.
In California, right? In California specifically, like west of the Sierras, it's really well accepted that our grasslands are now this Mediterranean annual grassland, and it's called the Mediterranean annual grassland type, California annual grassland type. It's like an accepted vegetation type. People aren't trying to change that. On the other side, in the Great Basin, it's more of a fight. People. I don't think anyone's going to ever be like, oh, well, that's fine. But people know that it's a battle. It's not going to be like completely eliminated. So there are like coming up with some interesting things.
Different states have different ways of categorizing weeds, and
Yeah.
at some point they just call it naturalized. At some point they never call a species out because it had some sort of like agricultural value at one point. So even though an area is not getting grazed, they're still going to consider that smooth brome as vegetation.
The states, like the weed commissioners, like those kind of people in the states, they don't care about this shit. They care about weeds that will infest farmland. Like those are the weeds that they're worried about. So this stuff, they're just like, you know, they're not as concerned about it. But, you know, there are, like in Nevada with cheatgrass, I don't think anyone's ready to just give up, but they're trying to figure out, the cattle are one way. Can we use cattle to keep the landscape from just, you know, cattle will eat the cheatgrass a certain time of year, and then maybe you won't get that fire cycle. That's one thought. There's bacteria that they're putting in place. That's new. There's like a bacterial control.
Did I ever tell you that they found a way that you can actually brew beer from cheatgrass seeds?
Brew beer.
Yeah.
New cultural
Yeah, new cultural use.
value right
Yeah,
there.
they can find a way to
Is it worthwhile beer?
harvest the seed heads, but
Yeah. Yellow star thistle up in Northern California, they make honey. It's supposed to be the best honey in the world.
really,
Yeah.
it's not.
Well, is that mixed into the biodiversity big then? Sustainability from that?
Well, so they used to, so the whole weed world is changing because there's been some papers published recently that have really looked at our non-native weed species impacting biodiversity, and they're basically finding no, it's actually increasing the number of species in any given area. It's not really driving anything extinct, you're just adding some more species. And so that's really making the whole weed world have to come up with a better argument on why they're doing what they're doing and why we should care. And so it's an ongoing dialogue right now.
That's interesting. Any other questions?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got one. The issue with fuel breaks and the invasive seed sources along, I mean, I guess we don't have any dispute that occurs. Obviously, it occurs, but do you have a thought on whether or not that we could limit the spread of some of those invasive species by containerizing those fires and keeping the fires in a more limited part of the landscape?
Yeah.
Because isn't that what the design of the fuel breaks
Yeah.
really is?
No, yeah, I agree. So the side that's going to send you scathing letters will say, oh, your fuel breaks don't stop sending in the fires, and I'm sure you've heard that argument a bazillion times. But we're coming back and saying, no, what about all these fires? We're catching at 10 acres because of the fuel break. So I totally agree. It's sure we might be introducing the seed source, which is already, don't get me wrong, is already present in a lot of it's all around. You're just sort of maybe giving it a couple miles in one direction at one point. You're not like introducing something from another continent. There's something that's already there. And then if you can drop the fire return interval in certain areas because of your fuel break management, yeah, it might be one-upping the plant. It might be doing better for the non-native plant issue than, yeah. But I think it's something that what I would argue is that we as an agency we have not articulated our position well at all. With it. So in our NEPA documents, like, oh, well, we're going to prevent non-native plants from, no, we need to own up to what we're doing, I think.
So what's the potential in after a Santa Ana type fire for these non-native highway we put in to spread laterally after an area is burned?
You mean the plants, the grasses?
Yeah, the grasses.
I think it's pretty good that you'll get a flush of annual grasses at post-fire. They'll be there. They'll move off the fuel break. I'm sure you could detect that. But how long that lasts, that's the question.
So there's a paper, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
There's a paper that Jan Byers and some other people did at the Pacific Southwest. And what they found was that, I think it was 60 meters laterally. So what would happen is there'd be a fire. And then, what happens, of course, is, the fuel break, if it's maintained, will still be there. And then after the fire, stuff will spread. And then, of course, the chaparral comes back outside of the fuel break.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did a study, and I think they found 60 meters either side and a descending frequency, thank you. So, there was quite a bit just off the fuel break, and the further you got away from the fuel break, it eventually petered out to nothing. I think that's what it was. I don't remember. It might have been 30 meters maybe 60 total. But it was like, yeah, you'd find some outside of fuel break, but eventually it just ran out and the chaparral took over.
And what so in coastal sage scrubs, which we don't deal with too much on the forest, we're kind of too high elevation, but in that veg type, you'll get that grass and then it stays. The coastal sage doesn't come back. And the chaparral, it seems like the chaparral comes back.
And it just comes down to the individual plant interactions. I mean,
Yeah.
chamise is a good fighter, whereas your California sage, it's a little bit of a pansy.
Yeah.
Pun intended.
All right.
But yeah, so there's what we think is happening, and then there's what the environmental world thinks is happening, and
Yeah.
we all need to work that out.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks, man. Always like you talk about. This one is especially interested in fuel breaks. Well, I'll tell you what, guys, we have one more speaker, and that's Neil. So let's take a quick little break, reinvigorate yourselves. I know we're towards the end of the day. I know it's getting late, it's warming up and everything. But let's take just a quick little break, and then Neil, you'll have it until the rest of the day or until about 3:30, whatever, wherever you get to. All right, no worries. Thanks, guys. Good questions.
That's